Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of It Starts With Plastic Free. Corey and Phil, we have got our guest here, Nick Palousis from 2XE today. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, really appreciate it.
Nick, let's start with 2XE. What is 2XE and what do you do?
Yeah, so we're basically a bunch of geeks that run around the countryside, engineers and scientists and people with business degrees, but we get engaged by companies to help them get to net zero and a circular economy with the best holistic return on investment. So we help them to try and win in business, but also win for the environment at the same time as well.
So we'll just break that down for a sec. Like, for everybody, what is net zero? I mean, we see it all the time. There's ads out there now with companies, sort of that's what they're aspiring to.
Yep.
But what's net zero?
Yeah, so if you just take sort of the basic maths terms and then look at what this means holistically. The emissions you create as a business, we try and get them down as much as possible, reduce those greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible, and whatever emissions is left, we try and absorb them through environmental projects like carbon offset, like revegetation or other forms of sort of emissions sequestration style projects to get the emissions down to a net zero kind of outcome. What this means, I guess more broadly, is based on the latest climate science, we need to limit our global warming to 1.5 degrees within the next 30 years. If we don't, then that leads to sort of substantial runaway environmental effects in terms of like environmental sort of ecosystem collapse, which our economy relies on. We rely on these ecosystems to survive and thrive and grow, right? And if we're not ramping down our greenhouse gas emissions, then that temperature rise will go beyond 1.5 degrees increase in the next sort of 30, 40, 50 years, or towards sort of 2100, the next sort of 80 or 75 years or so. And we're in a very different physical world, very challenging sort of environment. So we're trying to limit that. And that's what net zero is trying to get us down to the level where we can try and eliminate all the emissions we create as humans in an economy, and then by definition then reduce our global warming impacts in the coming years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about, Nick, you mentioned life cycle analysis as well. What about that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so life cycle analysis is a way of looking at your product or service and then trying to map out all the, I guess, environmental inputs and outputs that you're having with that product throughout its entire life cycle, from cradle, from all the materials you use, from right down to sort of what gets mined out and taken out of the ground, through to how it gets transported and manufactured and processed and ultimately sold, used, and then disposed of at its end of life. So it's about trying to map out the environmental impacts from cradle to grave, if you want to call it from that perspective, that kind of beginning to end. But also it gives you the opportunity to assess what the risks are to your business if you're manufacturing a product, in the case of, say, wipes, as well as opportunities to not only improve, but to take advantage of what I think is a really exciting future around a net zero and circular economy that results in economic growth to levels that we haven't never seen before. So I think it's a way of assessing both impact, risk and opportunity.
Yeah. So how does that, like you mentioned the economic growth, why? How does economic growth come into this by becoming...
Yeah, good question. So when our economy relies on three kinds of capital, right, to run. We rely on human capital, us, staff, people to work and to add value. We rely on production capital, in other words, the ability to take human capital and other resources and make stuff. And we rely on natural capital, which is those natural resources that we use in conjunction with human capital to make stuff right out there. Now, if you look at the last, say, 50 years, what's happened is the value of our production capital, of our, the way we kind of manufacture stuff, the value of all that in dollar terms has gone up dramatically, right? We're making more stuff, we're consuming more stuff, economic growth from that perspective, it's going up, right? Quite dramatically in the last 30 years, 50 years. Natural capital, in other words, the value of our people in terms of professional value, in terms of knowledge and skill sets, etc., has gone up. Not as much as the production capital, but it's gone up a little bit, kind of linearly, right? And natural capital, the value of our natural capital has depleted.
Yeah.
Because we're consuming in non-renewable ways. It depleted by 40%.
Yeah.
Right? And we cannot we cannot continue to maintain, let alone grow our economy, our local, national, international economies at the same rate we are anymore without restoring that natural capital. Otherwise, we'll have nothing left
makes sense.
to make stuff out of. That makes sense.
So, I mean, you talked about a net zero approach, and you mentioned a product like ours, which is a wet wipe. But what about businesses that are service oriented? Consultants, a legal firm, a finance firm.
Yeah.
How do they get their head around being net zero? Because
It's a really good question.
That's a lot of people go, well, that's just for products if you're making or selling a product. But in that situation, you're an office full of, you've got 10 staff. How do you get to net zero now?
Yeah, that's a different kind of challenge. Yeah. So, on one hand, we don't have the we're not reliant on as much natural resource to deliver the value to our market, right? We're a service-based business. We don't have to use stuff to make and then you've got that issue around supply chains. We don't have that as a consultant, right? We've got on the face of it, we've got people. They come into an office and work, or they work from home. There are many ways we can reduce our own environmental impact. Like we're a climate active, carbon neutral company now, right? So we're certified carbon neutral. We've reduced our emissions as much as we can at this stage, and then we've offset the rest. We have a plan over time to take our entire office to, ideally be off the grid completely. We're in Melbourne Street, try and get off the grid. That's our objective. Obviously eliminate the use of, combustion engine vehicles, only electric vehicles, whether we lease them or own them ourselves. The big challenge for us is flying, right? We fly interstate, international. Qantas is partnering with others now to sort of look at, sustainable aviation fuel, which will reduce the carbon offsetting. And there's a broader supply chain component to what we do that's kind of out of our control, but it's not as substantial as, say, a manufacturing business, right? So our challenges are different, but then if we've got staff working from home that are consuming stuff at home, we have to account for that impact as well. And then we're like, well, we have to now help you at home and maybe do things too. So a lot of service-based companies are thinking this way now, going, well, it's not just about getting our office to zero, it's about helping our staff, with commuting, with traveling, with working from home, that kind of thing.
You said you're carbon neutral accredited or certified?
Certified, yeah.
So how does a business get to that?
Yeah.
And because is it all, I think people want to believe that, because I think there's another one, climate active.
Yep. Which
so
is the certification.
Where we'd like to get to.
Yep.
How does one get to that and know that it's real?
Right.
Like when you've got ISO and you've got other accreditations, you've got independent auditors.
Yeah.
Is it something similar in that regard?
Yeah, similar. You have registered consultants that verify. See the key. I'm not going to go into every possible step. There's a fair bit of administration around that, but the key steps are you need to quantify your emissions. Inventory as well. If you're a company, you can, I'll get to sort of climate active for products and services, but if you're a company, you've got to get your greenhouse gas emissions inventory together, and that needs to be verified.
Yep.
That, what you put together is legitimate, you're using the same standards and processes that climate active are using, and then you've got to put in place a plan of how you're going to reduce those emissions over time, and whatever your emissions are now, to get to carbon neutrality, you have to buy carbon offsets to get that to zero. Now, buying carbon offsets to almost pay your way out of doing the actual work, I think is a actual problem. Like we can't get to net zero, truly net zero, and avert the worst that climate change is going to offer to us without, dramatic actual reductions in emissions. And carbon sequestration projects are always going to be part of the mix. The idea is to minimise that reliance on that.
So is that where, I often suspect a lot of the corporates that are saying they're getting the carbon neutral, that's where it's going on. We'll just buy the offsets and the shortcut.
Yeah.
Because there's so much they can genuinely do.
I think some probably are. I mean, thankfully, our clients, the clients we work closely with, it's kind of self-selecting. They engage us to show them how we can reduce their emissions directly. But the strong benefit of doing that is you're not actually paying. You're getting a net benefit. You're not just paying for the problem to go away. We're able to reduce their emissions directly and get substantial cost savings and all those kinds of things out of doing so. Do you know what I mean?
But you get incentivised doing business with these carbon neutral certified companies. Like that's is there movements within government or within industry saying, okay, if you're carbon neutral, you get X amount of benefit or incentive to deal with that?
Yep, I think especially I think in state governments and even corporates now as well, they're going, well, there's 3 scopes of emissions, right? Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. Scope 1 emissions relates to emissions associated with fuels you burn like gas, petrol, of assets you own, cars you own, buildings you own. Scope 2 is about electricity or purchased energy, but in most cases it's just electricity from the grid. Scope 3 relates to the products and services you buy and the embodied carbon in those. So now there's a quite a substantial shift happening with companies that have been on the Scope 1, 2 thing for a couple of years now, and now going rearing their heads going, we've got to deal with Scope 3 now. What kind of sanitary wipes do we buy now? Which ones are less carbon intensive? What kind of products and services do we buy and less carbon intensive? They're thinking in that way, not in a pretty material way now, not just this thing on the side anymore. It's like our supply chain represents our biggest carbon liability, our biggest risk. How do we shift that over time? How do we make the right purchasing decisions over time to account for that?
And Retail Australia would then, if they're going through that process, what they offer the consumer, that's really how they can impact change.
Yeah.
By ensuring that they're the companies, they're the suppliers, they're offering the public.
That I think is the opportunity for especially the retail environment, those that are consumer facing. Like the footprint they have of their supply chain, the product services they ship through their doors, is orders of magnitude bigger than their retail stores. So the big game for them, the biggest opportunity I think for the retailers, I'd say economic opportunity, they can unpack that a bit more, but also just like moral opportunity, without trying to go too far into that on a Wednesday, is that the leverage they can have. Yeah. You know what I mean? Which is why them being able to position themselves to communicate or at least prioritise, environmentally friendly or net zero or 100% circular product over non-equivalents of that, and at least being clear about what the difference is. I mean, we do that with health options, with organic versus not, and gluten-free versus not, and those kinds of things. So over time, hopefully in a short amount of time, you see that big shift happening in the retail front as well.
So where is let's take this pen for example, where is the carbon measured? Is it measured at the manufacturer's level or not the retailer? They're just passing it through. If that gets sold to a business, are they measuring it as well? Just the manufacturer?
So it's a good question. I mean, you ideally want each stage of the chain to make that pen, from the miner through, or the petrochemical company in the case of plastic, and the ink, through to the manufacturer, through to the transport distributor. And depending on, and the good news is there's a lot of movement happening across these value chains. They're measuring their own bit, and then, but there's no, and I guess this is the thing, if without trying to put too much politics into this, if you did have a global price on carbon, like a global agreed price, you'd see that flow through like it would GST. Like you'd see a lot of, flow on everyone measuring their impact, because there's ultimately like a price against that. Yeah. And then there's a clearer picture about whose impact is what as far as emissions is concerned. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. On that global price, so the Australian price for carbon credits is different. That's a different price to an overseas price.
Yeah. So you've got carbon offsets, which is like a financial instrument. Like each carbon offsets can be created through different ways. Yep. Different. You could argue they're different kind of quality of offsets. Some are made in developing countries using less than legal methods. And you might be spending $6 to $8 per tonne. Like the example of Westpac, they got caught out, I think, last year. Caught out in the sense they're intending to do anything dodgy. Yeah. They just bought carbon offsets cheaply from another country, and there were carbon offsets, but there's also modern slavery issues around that as well, right?
So the ethical sourcing piece.
The ethical, exactly right. Whereas if you went to say there's a carbon offset project that's happening here in Australia, I won't mention them, but that one of our clients is exploring right now, and their price for carbon offsets might be 4 or 5 times what that price in the emerging country is, but there's a story attached to it. Is ethical sourcing's clear, it's an indigenous project. Yeah. There's also some other benefits around that. So that's the carbon offset market. It's variable, it's not kind of regulated, whereas what I'm talking about is more of like what you might have seen, once again, don't want to get into the politics of it, but back in the late 2000s when you had Gillard Rudd and you had the carbon price that came in, if that carbon price comes in and it's kind of applied everywhere, then everyone would want to know what their exposure is, and then hence everyone's going to measure what their emissions are.
It's like GST. It's across everything. Everyone's paying.
So one's voluntary, which is like the voluntary kind of market thing, of buying offsets voluntarily. The other is we'd say more of a regulated price. But having said that, with carbon offsets, everyone kind of dunks on carbon offsets as being that's a cop out. But at the same time too, you look at the other way and go, in the absence of a carbon price, of a global or national carbon price, at least you're getting companies going, here's my carbon liability, we're going to pay for it. In the absence of us being able to reduce it at this stage, because it might be too hard to do, we're going to put a dollar figure against that, and at least that's kind of our, at least we know how much it costs us and it costs the globe kind of thing from buying by putting a number against it, and we'll reduce it over time. That kind of angle.
Nick, what industries are leading the way here or doing it right that you could say model your business or model yourself on this area? And it might not be in Australia. Is there overseas examples you've seen?
It's kind of hard to say in industry. I think historically, even if I say take locally, it is hard, I think, to say one industry is dominating over another. I think there's outliers, there's really good examples in each. I think you'd find the wine industry historically here in Australia and even globally, they've had to get good at this quite early because they're obviously exposed to the elements. Their businesses, they're running two types of business in the course of a year. One's a manufacturer, the other is an agribusiness. They've got other tensions and they've had to sort of work with that. And there, I think, overall, you'd say they would be ahead of the curve compared to most other industries, right? I'd probably say the other one would be kind of your asset portfolios, more generally, like own buildings and that kind of stuff. There's a fair bit happening there. There's still a lot of legacy issues you've got to deal with, but at least they're on the front foot. The other thing I'd say, probably the biggest shift I think I've seen in the last 3 years is the investment community now, putting substantial pressure now. Like I've been getting phone calls from CFOs and CEOs of large companies on the weekends, quite early in the morning, when I wouldn't usually expect that kind of crowd to call me at all, let alone on a Saturday morning, because they're invested. Look, it could be a super fund that I might have a part of their business now, is putting head on them, saying, how are you measuring this? What's your net zero plan? How are you gonna? Because here are your risks, and there's all sorts of things happening there now, which I think are super exciting. That were not there 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Now they're there, and that's what I think has led the big shift.
Yeah, that's great to hear. What, Nick? So you've done some environmental work for us, and a little bit about us, or a fair bit about us.
More to come, mate. More to come.
Absolutely. Yep. Just asking for the audience, like, what sort of impact, bringing it home here, what sort of impact does manufacturing plastic-free wipes over plastic wipes have? Just even thinking about the beginning of manufacturing plastic.
Well, there's obviously so many ways to counter it in a really positive way. Obviously, you're not taking oil out of the ground for starters, right? And there's an impact there. If you're not taking oil out of the ground, there's a carbon emissions benefit there. If you've got plastic-free wipes and wipes that can go into a compostable environment, on the other end of think of the oil being at the cradle, at the grave end, you're like, well, I'm done with this wipe. If it's got plastic in it, you can't put it into compost, right? And it goes into landfill, decomposure, methane. Methane is, stamps, I think it's like 17 to 21 times more. It varies year on year depending on the stats, but times more potent than CO2. So you don't want that in landfill, otherwise it decomposes. So if it goes into compost, then if it's plastic free and bio based, then you can put that into compost, and that can add value back into the environment in a positive way. Yeah. So I think on those two elements alone, there are other obviously benefits if you're manufacturing local here rather than manufacturing overseas, and adding the water in here to the wipes here rather than in another country and shipping it, then you don't have the weight that you're transferring from another country to here, which means you're saving on transport, fuel and freight fuel, and all that kind of stuff kind of adds up. And so there's substantial benefit.
I always find it fascinating. The chemical industry in Australia seems to have changed pretty much to manufacturing here locally. Bottled water seems to be going the other way, and wet wipes are all imported as well, which are those three things are pretty much all water shipping around the world.
Look, I just think that if you've got things like when it comes to the whole oil thing, right, and peak oil and that kind of stuff, like I'm not going into detail, and it'll take many hours to even just unpack that, but, you know, oil, like the Stone Age, I forgot who said it, I think it was one of the sheikhs of in Saudi Arabia said, like, you know, the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stone. The oil age won't end for lack of oil. Oil will always be around in some way. I think the idea is if you're going to take a non-renewable source out of the ground, use it, make good use of it for something that's higher value than turning it into a wipe and then throwing it into a bin and taking it to a landfill.
Yeah.
Why not design something that then, if you're going to throw it away, make sure it goes back into a circular kind of chain that adds value in another way. Why would just throw it into a pit that does nothing except decompose and create emissions?
Well, that's the human nature, or corporate nature, to sort of commoditise stuff in the easiest route, and we can make this out of it, and that's where we're at. That point you brought up, Corey, it also makes me wonder: is it a way, like since COVID, there's been a big thing about reinvigorating Australian manufacturing, our sovereign capability. Besides the simple stuff like we're importing water from overseas and we're an alternative here, that's less carbon intensive. But has this whole discussion, do you think, really hit home on the opportunities for manufacturing in Australia? Because where else we're strong in agriculture, wine you mentioned, but what other sectors have we not really clicked and gone, shit, why are we actually importing that when we could be making it here, and there is going to be a future coming up because of the whole carbon neutral opportunity? Yeah,
I think I think it hasn't just been the environmental push, but when you've had that sort of severe supply chain, COVID's obviously accelerated things, changed the dynamics or the price points, as well as just supply chain, overall international supply chain constraints, as well as international, when you're looking at international kind of tariffs, especially coming out of China or other countries, the potential impact of carbon sort of trade exposed sort of carbon tariffs you might see out of Europe. There's a whole bunch of pressures that I think are lending itself towards a reinvigoration of manufacturing here in Australia, I think. And a couple of our larger clients saw this coming 8 years ago and have been sort of preparing. Like, they saw this and they'll, wouldn't have had, speaking to a large, retail-based but manufacturing-based business, and them going, well, it's a risk now to be manufacturing overseas. We're going to start looking local here again, I think, but in terms of which sectors are kind of making that push, I think food will probably continue to, amplify itself here. Medical-based products just based on operational security. I mean, you speak to a lot of the health. I do a lot of work with New South Wales Government, New South Wales Health. This whole thing around we need to manufacture our supply chain here because there's a real risk if we get blockages or if there's another kind of COVID, 10.0 or whatever it is where we're at now with variants or whatever it is. That's a real material risk now, and so manufacturing, especially in the medical space, where it feeds into critical services, is going to. So I think food, the medical space is going to matter a lot more now.
Is there any stats on food consumed in Australia and what percent comes from Australia?
Probably years. I couldn't tell you what they are, but I think you'd see. I think part of that has to do with our palate. Like I think for a period of time we'll go and kind of Western American kind of get all that kind of stuff over here, and I think now we're starting to sort of appreciate our own uniqueness of food,
especially in South Australia.
Yep, spot on, mate. Spot on.
Nick, if you're going to sort of give advice to a business owner, two types, a startup, where are the opportunities for them in what you're seeing now? Because a lot of people out there are looking at maybe an opportunity out there. Like, what is the opportunity for them versus a company that's established and might be at a plateau and goes, you know what, if we don't make a move now, we might be a dinosaur in 5 years' time?
Well, I think the benefit of any startup, irrespective of industry, I mean, I'm always going to say, look, get into the circular economy and net zero space, because we need as many startups as possible with alternative solutions to get us to the outcome.
Right.
The benefit is the market is massive. It's like I've been in this field for 20 years, and I was not prepared, for example, of the uptick in our own demand the last 12 months.
And that'd be compounding,
insane.
obviously, yeah.
Oh, it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
It's you're in a different world now. So any startup that works in this kind of space is super exciting, right? But I think overall with startups is you've got the benefit of learning from our mistakes.
Yeah.
But you've got to have the patience to learn from our mistakes and do it right. Do your best to get the right advice from people, but at the end of the day, you've got to make your own decisions about things. Like you've got to look at, because if you're learning from me and I've made my mistakes, you don't want to pick up my mistakes either. So I think overall there's a thing of like, well, don't you learn from the mistakes, especially when it comes to like, if you want to come up with a net zero company, for example, or a company that makes a product or service that is net zero, think about it from the outset, like you guys are, right? You're thinking of your early phase, rapid growth. You're trying to embed this stuff, these principles in at the outset in an uncompromising way. Whereas others who have been operating for 10 years or 5 or 10 years plus, they feel like they have to compromise now because they're dealing with the prevailing business model, and that they have to make it a little less bad. Whereas if you design from the outset, net zero, circularly thinking that way, whether it's your product or service or whatever you're doing, then you don't have to compromise.
But the fear of an established business is that exactly that. They might go, okay, I can see that we need to do something, but fear obviously puts people off, and they'll just ignore it and hope it goes away. And this isn't going away.
Suck it up, princess. I mean, it's kind of like the thing is like like I think that's the thing. I think I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of getting into war stories, but sometimes it takes a really shitty situation to remind yourself what your entrepreneurial spirit is and how you actually need those pressures to remind yourself of your instincts, your ability to kind of not compromise, shift, move rapidly, stay on the front foot. I mean, it's very easy, I think in South Australia, to feel comfortable and established. It's very easy to create a sense of security and certainty here. It's not until you start exposing yourself to what other states are doing, what other countries are doing, and how fast they're moving, that when you look at that and go, that's super exciting, but man, like I've got to start taking some risks. So I think in my world, safe is risky. The moment you start feeling comfortable, you're like a lion that gets thrown into a cage.
If you're not being born, you're dying.
Yeah, spot on.
That happens in business.
You got it. It's the whole. And that's the best part about business is you can craft your own future. I think I don't know anyone who kind of goes, I'm in business just so I can retire in 30 years time, or less, or 5 years time, whatever it is, and just I think that might be a nice little objective, but I think you've got to look into the real reason as to why you're running a business.
The purpose. So companies like yourselves are out there to help businesses like that say, hey, look, we are an accounting business or we're in finance and finance advice. How do we get to that next level, or a manufacturing company?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, for me, the main objective is how do we help a business win through this, right? It's not about counting the carbon and getting to net zero is kind of the end, is one measure.
Process.
The most important thing we do is look at a business and go, where are your opportunities, where are your risks, how do we position you on the right side of history when it comes to net zero and circular economy, but how do we help you create cost savings, look at new product services that can tap into this opportunity, position yourself with an emerging market or demographic or whatever it is. So we have this weird thing, and then depending on the kind of business, either I can stay at the strategy level and the business level, or I can bring my geeky engineers to redefine the way things are done.
Yep, and the world can always have a few more geeks out there.
Spot on, that's the idea.
Spoken by one.
A couple of us.
Exactly.
If any of the audience would like to find out more about Nick, his contact details up on screen now, and we'll pass on all the socials in the post on this one. Get hold of Nick from 2XE, or just have a look at a few of the things that are happening in this space. There's some really good advice here if you're a startup or you're a business that you're concerned about where your future might lie. That was some great advice there, mate.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
And we'll continue doing our work with you. And one of our aims is to be that climate active brand.
We'll get you there, mate.
Thank you. That's good.
Yep.
Until next time on It Starts Plastic Free, and before I go, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a comment if you like or a question, and we're here to help. See you next time.
Thank you.